Good morning, and welcome to another week of Journey with Christ. I'm your host, Mark Mitchell, a preaching minister at the Park Avenue Church of Christ here in Charleston, West Virginia. I'm so glad you've joined us. I'm joined, as usual, by Steve Fox, a minister for over 50 years. How you doing today, buddy?
Hey, Mark, I'm doing fine. I need to get rested up here. I ran in that marathon in the Olympics. Oh, no, that was something else.
We might excuse you for some confusion, but that's
pretty confused, isn't it?
Yeah, that's pretty confused and delirious, too.
I graduated from high school in 71. In 72, they had the Olympic trials, and there was only one reason I didn't get to run in the Olympic trials.
What was that?
I wasn't any good. I could go through the district and the regional, but state meet was pretty far away from me, a long way.
Yeah, well.
I still love watching people. Some people are just plain bored. Say, you gonna sit there and watch that for 2 hours? Yeah.
Well, to me, that's in the same. It's like watching paint dry. Of course, I know that there are things I like to watch that my wife looks and goes, to her, that's as watching paint dry. Like if I'm watching golf or if I'm watching fishing.
Or if Susie wants to watch The Notebook one more time.
Well, as you might notice, Steve and I, at least I am dressed differently than normal today. Today, we're recording this on the day of Ken Yoder's funeral. And Steve and I are doing this before we go to the funeral. And so that's going to be prevalent on our mind as we do our class today. And that's just so you know, give you context of maybe what might be heavy on our heart today.
And also to tell the Yoder family how much we appreciate not only their dad and their grandpa, but the whole family.
Yes. There's that's a big void now.
And I talked to Ken a little bit about this, not very much, but Yoder is an Amish name.
Mm-hmm.
And where I grew up, there are Amish everywhere. And there are lots of Yoders. And there's little villages in central Ohio. It'd be like being named Smith.
Yeah.
There are Yoders everywhere.
Yeah, there are Yoders everywhere. I even joked with Anna Friday when I used to drive up and down Coal River Road all the time, and I'd see that Yoder sign, Yoder Lane. I thought, well, man, I didn't know we had Amish people living around here, And I joked with her. Of course, I could tell. I saw a power hooked up to their houses, so I knew they weren't Amish. But it is a little bit different. But if you would like to turn your Bibles to Luke chapter 18, we're going to begin reading in verse 9. Today we're doing the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. And it is another parable that pertains to prayer. A lot of these writers grouped parables that were topic related together. That doesn't necessarily mean they happen simultaneously. They were put together so that a same topic could be covered. When we talked last week about the parable of the persistent widow, her persistence was in prayer for a specific thing, for justice. And this week we've got an attitude of prayer that we're going to discuss as it relates to the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. Would you like for me to read, or do you want to read?
I'll read, and you can do all the...
Okay.
All the commentary.
Yeah, right.
He also told this parable to some... This is a fabulous verse. He also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and despised others. Wow.
That is even today, that's a big crowd.
That's a very big crowd. And what's so impressive is Jesus put that huge thought in those two little lines.
He's almost telling us who is the parable intended to help.
And we've gone over this several times.
Who are you?
Who am I in the parable?
That's right.
2 men went up, that's us. That's Mark and Steve. 2 men went up into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself: God, I thank thee that I'm not like other men, extortioners, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week, I give tithes of all that I get. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even lift up his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast and said, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified, rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, for he who humbles himself will be exalted. A lot of stuff right there.
Oh, and here is the one. There are two, and we talked about this here recently. One of the elements that, if you read the Bible, that are from Genesis 1 to Revelation 21, 22. One attitude that's in there: God opposes the proud.
Oh, man.
And gives grace to the humble. It is.
You don't believe that? Read the minor prophets.
I don't care where you read.
It's all the way through there.
It's all the way. The Proverbs themselves, Psalms, Ecclesiastes. I mean, and even examples, and even the prophets give it out through the entire. It is a principle by which the relationship that you have with God is paramount. You don't approach the throne of God with an attitude, God, you owe me.
Yeah.
I'm a good fella.
Isn't it amazing what kind of Christian I am?
Yeah.
Man, if people just knew everything about me and how wonderful I was.
Well,
there'd be statues everywhere.
And it's just like all of a sudden he's given his credentials to God, in his prayer, God, I am so glad.
Like God doesn't know that.
Yeah. That, I'm this guy. One of my favorite parts of reading, and Steve knows that the book of Isaiah is a favorite book of mine to read in the Bible. I was caught off when I really started reading Isaiah. I mean, he goes through those several chapters, he gives a little bit of context, and then he goes into all his woes. And he gives it to everybody. I mean, he's got a list it's several chapters long, that where he's talking about, he's sort of like, reminds me of this Pharisee right here. He's looking over this tax collector and it says, I thank God I'm not like him. Well, Isaiah does sort of the same thing, though. Don't get me wrong. Isaiah, what he said was right. But it seems that in Isaiah chapter 6, God had a little lesson to give Isaiah. Because in Isaiah chapter 6, Isaiah has a dream. He's standing before the throne of God. And all of a sudden, he changes the woe. He gives his first woe on me, because he realizes I'm no better than they are. When you get right down to it, I mean, maybe I don't deal with lust like this person, or deal with alcohol like this person, or maybe I'm not greedy, but for a fact every human being out there has something. And I'm being kind when I say just something. Most of us got several things that we're dealing with that cause us that we should be humble before God, because what do we got to offer? And it wasn't until that moment that Isaiah realizes, ooh, woe is me.
Yeah. Well, I think most of us have gone through some periods where it's human nature to want other people to notice you and to award you and say you got good grades, or your conduct is really good. It's really easy when we use our human nature to find ourselves doing that. But when he says in the first verse, let me explain to you what this guy was like. Number one, he trusted in himself. Number two, he trusted that he was righteous, and that made him, number three, despise other people.
That's right. It's Jesus ties and Luke tie a paramount condition. When you're judging others, what you're saying and condemning others is that you're better.
I heard a minister say, and I apologize for quoting somebody that I can't remember who it was, but I heard a minister say one time, every man that you meet is superior to you in some area.
That's right.
You find somebody who's living under the Southside Bridge,
It doesn't make
he
any
can do something,
that you
maybe
can't.
many things that you can't.
Yeah, I mean, I met people who I thought were just had no skills whatsoever. Next thing I know, they draw a picture of something, and I'm thinking, where did that come from? Or they sing a note, and you think to yourself, wow, that person can sing.
Yeah.
Or they pick up a guitar. I mean, it doesn't make any difference what it is. Everybody is gifted in some way or another, even if it's someone who's maybe not the sharpest knife in the block, but who's always the happiest and always gives comfort.
He's not the sharpest knife in the place where they keep the knives.
The drawer.
The drawer.
Or I was thinking of the butcher block.
Yeah.
But you're right, and this man had his attitude was that, he was confident in and of himself. As the NIV says it a little bit different, but it's actually it says it in a way that we kind of communicate today. To some who are confident of their own righteousness and look down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. That is the human condition today. The most amazing thing to me is that 2,000 years ago, that was the human condition then. We haven't changed.
I think it's continual.
I think it's a human condition.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a permanent one, that it's so easy to think more highly, as Paul likes to say in Philippians. It's easy to think highly of yourself. It's hard to be like Jesus, who thought little of himself.
And when you start trusting in yourself 100% of the time, you're going down the wrong road.
Well,
because
you're going to have to give an account for something.
Yeah.
So, the two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other tax collector. As Steve has reminded us several times in our quest to understand the parables, who am I in the parable? In other words, are you self-righteous, or do you constitute yourself a sinner?
Yeah, and sometimes people just jump over this definition, but the one that went up to the temple to pray, well, both of them did, but the first one says, God, I thank thee that I'm not like other men. We've all met people who go through life like that, thinking, I'm glad I'm not like her. I'm glad I'm not like that. Instead of giving them a chance and allowing them to have the same grace and mercy that you have, we take that away from them and say, well, those people can't be competent. They can't be Christians. They can't be people who make this world better. I know some things about their background.
One of the worst things that happens in a broad sense with not salvation, but with religion. And religion is man's approach to God. Okay, make sure you understand it. It's not classification. It's not ideas of salvation. Religion is your expression of what all this means, your relationship with God.
Yeah.
Some people's relationship has built upon this status is that, like you've mentioned once or twice in our class here, grace is given to those for the part you can't do. Okay? Like, I'm good enough up to this point, but I need grace to...
I'm 80% good.
I'm 80% good. I need the extra grace, 20% to get me over there.
Yeah.
And what happens with that mindset is, like the Pharisee, you look at this other man and says, well, I'm an 80%er. He can't be more than... He's at best 20. You know, so he's one of those really, really bad guys. And in a roundabout way, he thinks to himself, man, God, I thank you I'm not like that man. You only have to give me 20% grace. That man's going to need 80%.
Well, back in the first century when Jesus told this parable, there were all kinds of people standing around him who listened to this, who fit that category exactly.
Exactly.
They felt that they were righteous. They despised other people. Their holiness was in their own system.
Mm-hmm.
I can come across being very, very righteous, and I can come across as being very, very wholesome because that's what I am.
Well, you know, to give a little bit of a word study, a lot of times the word righteous and justify can be interchanged. And as we all know, talking about justify, I love that word because it kind of like says what it is. It's justify your existence. Justify whatever you're doing. Prove that what you're doing is right and others is wrong. You justify. And this Pharisee was justifying his existence, his position, his, you know, what he was entitled to, whereas the tax collector, what he was entitled to too.
I always think it's interesting to look and see what the definitions of the people are in the parable.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus' definition here is, this is somebody, well, the Pharisees were kind of like that anyway. The Pharisees were the ultra-conservatives of the day. And when they got on a roll and added some more verses to the Torah and some more verses and subplots, and this is also something you should be taking aware of. The Pharisees were righteous, self-righteous. They were important. They did exactly everything that God told them to do through the law. And so that made them more important than anybody else. And it sure made him more important than a tax collector. Because the tax collectors are usually, not all the time, but they are usually Romans.
Well, not to disagree with you, but I will add one caveat to what you said. But Jesus called them on some of their stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Because they had turned some things into, that's where their faith was in, like the washing of hands.
Or taking a donkey out of a ditch.
Yeah, you can't just do certain things on the Sabbath day. I mean, people were stoned for helping someone on the Sabbath. And I thought to myself, well, how did they get justification to do the stoning to pick up the rock? You know, I mean, you know, at what point don't you pick up something? But anyway, yeah, it is.
Well, in the parable, Jesus makes two very distinct comparisons here. The Pharisee is the one who's the ultra-conservative of the day, and then this tax collector is probably a Roman citizen, and they don't like him because of the fact that he's taken their money, their taxes, and sending it to Caesar, and they don't want that. They're ticked off that they have to do that. So they don't. Most of the people in the first century didn't like either one of these guys.
No.
And they didn't want to be a Pharisee, and they certainly didn't want to be a Roman tax collector.
Or it could have been just as easily been someone like Matthew, who was a Jewish tax collector, who was even lower than the Roman tax collector because he was a traitor. He had forgotten his upbringing, and of course Matthew was a Levite, so he was supposed to be part of the Pharisee branch. Matthew's a great study.
Yes, it is.
But yeah, you're right. Both of these men are seen in the public differently in different context. One's esteemed, one is looked down upon. And Jesus is pointing out the common condition of everyone here. But then they have something in common. They're standing before God. And God turns their common interest upside down on itself.
They both went into the temple for the same thing. They both went there to pray.
Pray.
Now, you can have good prayers and you can have awful prayers. You can be close to God and try to pray, and be as far away as you can from God and try to pray. But that was their purpose. And all of a sudden, these two men that have the same purpose, the spotlight's on one of them for a certain thing, and then the spotlight's on the other one for a certain thing. I like what Jesus said in verse 11. He prayed with himself. There wasn't even anybody around that wanted to pray with him. He just prayed with himself. God, I thank thee that I'm not like other men. How many times have we done that? How many times have you looked at me, Mark, and said, I'm just so glad I'm not like him? Oh, no, that's not what Susie told me to say.
Yeah.
I thank thee that I am not like other men. Extortioners, I mean, this is a great list right here.
Yeah.
Extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax collector right there, even like that guy.
Yeah, I mean, put him with the NIV reads robbers, evildoers, and adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I mean, you know, we've all got a list, and I don't care who you are. You have a list of the people whose sins ranks, and if you ever see any of those people, you're like, throw them under the bus or whatever. You know, they're bad.
And then all of a sudden we have the parable pointing to these two men. We have the parable pointing to, first of all, a guy who didn't have any right talking about how righteous he was, because Jesus says he's just self-righteous. He goes through life telling everybody, or at least making everybody think that he's important, that he's self-righteous. And he starts his self-righteousness list by saying, I fast twice a week. Can you imagine somebody getting up at Park Avenue on Sunday morning and standing up in front and saying, I'd like to tell you about this week. I fasted twice this week. I'm giving 10% of all that I have today. I helped like 3 or 4 people this week. And you start making your list. It's almost like you're giving Jesus your resume. Here's the good things I did. And then that's supposed to use your word, justify myself.
Well, the thing is this. When you're keeping a record for what purpose? In comparison to everyone else. So when you say those things to people, in essence, what you're saying, look what I did. What did you do? You know.
Yeah,
Can you top that?
That always reminds me of Paul's declaration in 1 Corinthians, where he says, he starts listing the people that he baptized, and he said, besides that, I can't remember. Paul did a lousy job of keeping a list when he baptized people. He says, I can't even remember if I did any more than that.
Yeah.
But, you know, Canal City one time, we had 6 baptisms one morning, and I told one of the elders, I said, that's about as close to Pentecost as we're ever going to get.
Yeah.
6 people in one day. Now, if somebody stands up and say, I baptized 6 people this week. Well, as my daughter would always say, well, whoop-de-flip-and-do. Doesn't make any difference, does it? But when I start listing all these things and then try to tell everybody how great I am because of my list, he says, those are people who trust in themselves.
Yeah, their righteousness is dependent upon their own merit, their own worth, and the one truth that is paramount, and I can't stress this enough. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's a human condition that we cannot trust in what we're capable of doing, because if we do, it's idolatry first of all. Secondly, it offers nothing. There's no hope in it.
Well, to quote your book a little while ago, what you said about Isaiah. Mm-hmm. It's in Isaiah where it says, all of our righteous things are like filthy rags.
Yeah. Paul loved that one. He used it again in Corinthians.
Yes, yeah.
And then, as you said earlier, that's what that man says. I fast twice a week, give a tenth of all I got. But the tax collector stood at a distance. What?
How'd you like to go to work every morning where the people, everybody you meet that day, they're going to hate you?
Yes.
That's his job.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you, but the tax collector stood at a distance. Tax collector standing at a distance, in essence, means I know I'm not as worthy as you, so I'm staying away in order not. It's sort of like the woman has the blood disease. Anyone who was unclean was supposed to announce they were unclean. Now, this tax collector, in a way, is announcing to everyone by standing at a distance, I'm a sinner.
Yeah.
I'm a sinner. My attitude is such, I don't want to, just in case my appearance bothers you, I'll stand over here.
And who were the people around Jesus when he told this parable? That's an interesting question. It doesn't give us any definitions, but
well, he says to some who were confident of their own righteousness. So evidently, it was a crowd of people who were acting as the Pharisee did.
Yes.
And you don't have to be a Pharisee to act this way. He could have been a tax collector who thought himself righteous, but in this case, he didn't.
And as the people stood around in a circle that day, or however they were sitting, as they stood around in a circle or sat in a circle, listened to this parable, they're asking themselves, am I like a tax collector? Am I like a Pharisee? Is that what God wants in my life?
Mm-hmm.
Will he be happy if I really, really start to practice my self-righteousness? There's all kinds of questions that come up here. But this one guy, the tax collector, nobody likes him.
No.
Nobody likes him because he's taken their money and given it to somebody else. Nobody likes him, and it's pretty easy to not like this guy who says, look at all the good things I've done. It's pretty easy not to like him. The tax collector standing far off would not even lift his eyes to heaven. What do you think that means? He wouldn't even look up to heaven.
He's ashamed before God.
Yeah.
I mean, when I sometimes think about it in my own mind, and I know that's where we got the bowing of our head in prayer, because there are some religions that do this.
Or kneel down.
Or kneel down. We have several instances in our Bible where he wouldn't look up into heaven, or he lay prostrate, which is face down, spread eagle, on the floor before God, as a reminder to all of us that the throne of God is a sovereign, holy place. Even in prayer, even when you're going there in your mind, don't show up.
What do you think this phrase means, he beat his chest?
He buffeted his body. I mean, he was just... I always took it to mean that I'm ashamed of myself. Let me punish me.
He's doing some kind of self-punishment.
Yep.
And a lot of people live by that rule. If you do something bad, mom and dad's not there to help you, or they're not there to punish you, so you punish yourself.
Well, it's more of for contextual purposes and for those who are moving forward, not to say to beat yourself, or as a common philosophical or psychological approach is, don't beat yourself up over that. Well, there's a little bit of truth to it, but there's not a lot, because in essence, you need to recognize that sin is bad. Mm-hmm. And this man, this tax collector, recognizes his sin and how shameful it should be and is. And he is proclaiming before God, God, not only do I know that I shouldn't look at you, but I don't even like myself. I'm so ashamed of myself.
Was the Pharisee a sinner?
No, absolutely.
Was the tax collector a sinner?
Absolutely.
They're both in the same category.
They were so in the same boat. They both needed the righteousness.
And one of them looked at it the right way.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them just missed it completely.
And the most amazing thing, I love the last line. because I know this gets a lot of talk. I tell you this, that the man rather than the other went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. I remember one time someone saying to me, here the Pharisee is this great guy, does all these great things, and it seems like he's probably in religious Hall of Fame, his community, they love him, he's a great guy, they look up to him. And the lousy sinner, tax collector, we could use modern versions of explanations of the harlot, alcoholic, drug addict, beat their chest before God and said, "Forgive me, I am a sinner." And Jesus says, the latter went home justified before God. What does that mean? Were they right before God? Was their sins forgiven?
That's certainly a start.
Yep.
That's certainly the place to start. And other people who are listening to Jesus that day had to make that decision. But
well, it's a step in the right direction, but what I love about it is Jesus acknowledges they were justified.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it doesn't mean they're pure, but their sins are forgiven. But that doesn't mean, like we all know, that's never where any of this stuff ever. It's where it begins, but that's not where it ends.
Yes. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled. All of us have met, and sometimes we are those people. All of us have met people that it just couldn't stand being around because it's like somebody going on a blind date, and this guy talks for 20 minutes about how great he is, and then he says, "Well, enough about me. How great do you think I am?" But we've been around people that's all they talk about. They're talking about their accomplishments.
And I think we all, if we get right down to it, we all struggle with that one.
Oh, so we certainly do.
I mean, there are some days I'm closer to that guy than I am being.
Every one of us have done something or accomplished something where we just hoped and prayed that somebody would mention that.
Yeah. Can I show you? Hey, can I show you my humble award?
Here's your humble pin, but if you wear it next Sunday, we're going to take it away from you.
That's right.
That humility part is stuff. It's difficult for almost everybody to do. Everyone who exalts himself will be humbled. But then Jesus gives there's an alternative to that. There's a good way to handle this, Jesus is saying. If you got these two guys going up to the temple, there's a good way to handle this. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but he who humbles himself will be exalted. Most people read that and say, "I can't do that. Do I want to go through life humbling myself, being humble?" Well, yeah, because the end result is so much different than people going through life saying, "Look at my house, and look at my car, and look at my job, and look at my kids. Look how wonderful I've accomplished things in this life in just such a short term."
Yeah, if you need any help, you need any reminder, come sit beside me and I'll tell you about it. We'll go get my awards out and I'll show them to you.
I should have brought some of those this morning.
Yeah, we all should have. But, again, as I said from the very beginning, that specific attitude is paramount. And if you can't get that one, none of the rest of them, none of the things that Jesus and God talk about will ever make sense to you, because those truths, those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Those two realities, which are opposite of each other, are paramount.
Yep.
You've got to have those. You have to understand that. And I think most people do. But we live in a culture that that is interested in what making themselves look good. It's like when someone makes a commercial for their product, but they don't say anything about their product on their commercial. All they say is all the great things they've done as a company. I'm always thinking to myself, okay, and that's how our minds work. We think if those people know how good we are, they're going to want to do business with us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that attitude comes up in everybody's lives. The next thing you know, we're talking about, well, I ran into so-and-so and I gave them $50 out of my pocket because you know how bad they are. Next thing you know, you're always, you're exalting yourself and not, as Jesus pointed out and says, don't even let the left hand know what the right hand's up to.
So we can't leave any part of this parable without asking the question.
Who am I?
Who are you in the parable?
Well, I hope believe it or not, I hope I have the attitude of the tax collector. But I know I struggle with the attitude of the Pharisee, too.
Yeah. It's easy to go back and forth.
It is.
It's very easy to want people. Well, school started today. There are kids at that school that are going to be, I hope I'm a good basketball player. I hope I'm a good volleyball player. I hope my grades are real good. I hope my teacher says my conduct is good. I learned what the word conduct meant in the 3rd grade. I learned in a hurry because my mom said if I ever got a C in conduct again, there was going to be Hades to pay. Well, it's real easy to go in the school environment to say, people put these things up here and we want you to do that. We want you to
excel and achieve and get the honors. And at graduation, son, I want you to be going across that thing about 5 times for all the great things so I can look up there and tell them, that's my boy.
Well, we're down a different road totally, but let me tell you this. I'll go down a little farther, a different road.
We need to close.
Mr. Charlie Guzman was in my class in high school. And we went across the stage and the principal would hand you your diploma. And they had asked at the beginning of the ceremony, please don't anybody applaud or yell things out or be civil about this. Well, Charlie goes across the stage and the principal hands him his diploma. And Charlie went, "See there, Dad, you were wrong." And a few people laughed, like a lot of people laughed. But, there are so many in our job, in school, etc. There are all kinds of things that we put up there and then try to reach them.
Yeah.
But if the difference between saying, I know God gives me certain gifts, or saying, I did this on my own. This is me. This is all me.
Well, that will end our lesson this week on the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. Does that conclude all of our parables?
There's one, the last parable that Jesus tells is kind of comprehensive, is that the word? Where a lot of people don't hear his invitation. Mm-hmm. And he said, the guy that's making the banquet says, let's invite everybody in. Let's go invite the sick, the infirmed, the Pharisees, the tax collectors. Let's invite everybody.
Let's invite everybody.
So we can kind of hit on that one next week.
And that will conclude our series on the parables at that point in time. Okay. Well, next week, that's the parable we'll be studying, and we look forward for you to join us. If you have any questions, any comments, anything that you would like to discuss, and maybe if you got some suggestions for the next topic, please let us know. We just assume we know anything's okay. But if there's a specific topiy, send us in a note. Let us know. We'd love to hear from what you got.
And if we get more than 100 suggestions, you and I will have to choose one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
my choice would be much better than yours because I'm more self-righteous than you are.
Yeah, you're part of that 80% crowd.
Yeah.
Well, on behalf of Steve and I, have a great week, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.